Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod. We have Bryan Trilli with us today. Bryan is founder at PyImageSearch, optimized marketing as well, Opti Retros. Opti Reto. He's a serial entrepreneur, studied engineering, and is as obsessed as myself with AI. He's also a book author. You can find it on Amazon. This podcast is presented to you by podbear.com. If you want to start a podcast and monetize podcasts, convert guests into clients, get sponsors, get more notoriety, more authority, you can go to podbear.com. We have a free ebook and a masterclass showing you how to do all of that. Bryan, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Thanks. Glad to be here. So one correction, I'm actually not the founder of PyImageSearch. That was an acquisition. So I start businesses, acquire businesses, sell businesses. Just depends on the goal at the time, but the rest of it was accurate. And so these days I'd say, what's the quickest way to summarize it? As an entrepreneur, AI has made it easier to start companies than ever before. And there's a lot of noise because of that. Because everybody's thinking, oh yeah, I'll just go on and whatever your favorite tool is, Claude or GPT or Gemini or any of the more specific ones, and provide something of value. But it's a little bit harder than that in the implementation phase. And you still have to have all of the requirements of a good business. You have to provide actual value. You have to have a way to communicate. You have to have a unique selling proposition, all the tools that we would know as running a business that are important. So I don't know if it would help your listeners to talk more about what I would do as a startup, because I'm kind of treating all of my companies now as startups and reinventing them from scratch because you have to, or what we look at from more established, because optimized marketing has been running for over a decade.
Well, I'm curious about your first company because you seem to be in the lead gen space and you're an investor as well. You were first owner of Trilli Performance Engineering. Tell us a bit more about that one.
Oh man, I had so many companies over the years. So that was I'm a mechanical engineer by education. So that was a company that I started, had a few clients, but never really paid the bills. And it was set up to take electronic fuel injection, put it on old cars. So basically engine calibration and tuning. And again, it was fun. I really enjoyed doing it. I worked some really neat, fast cars, but never was big enough or sustainable enough to turn into a full-time income.
Right, because I was thinking about that the other day. Like, I don't know, as a retirement career, which doesn't make any sense for me because I would never really retire. But just as a hobby, tuning cars, right, and muscle car, for example, which are not super trendy in the electric age, but tuning vehicles, there seems to be something very satisfying about that. I'm a motocross addict, so I love getting my bike out and so forth. But yeah, the economics wouldn't make sense, except if you're like the leader, right? Like the people that tuned Joe Rogan's Hyper Beast car.
Yeah, I mean, there's a market for it. And for the high end, I think the most interesting thing I ever did was tune a boat. It was two 632 cubic inch engines, did not have a dyno. So had to do it in real time while going across the water, and you had two engines. So I had two computers and was sort of, I had my initial mapping set up, but then had to adjust. And we hit 106 miles per hour, which is insane speed on a boat. It's like
very dangerous.
Fast, at least is what it would feel like in a car. So that was fun. Yeah, I got a nice trip and some fun stories out of it, but yeah, had to pivot because I needed more.
Needed your life at 160 miles an hour. Like, is that the top speed of 106? Okay, yeah. Which is still fast. It's like 130 kilometers an hour on a boat. It's insane. Is that like the top speed in a speedboat?
I think we hit 106 while tuning, and later that day, I believe we topped at 108. GPS verified, by the way, because the speedometers on boats are horrible, very inaccurate. But yeah, GPS verified. It's quick.
Right. What did you do after that? Because it seems you got owner and GM at Westwood Culligan in Farmington. So you shifted towards that in the meanwhile of owning Trilli. So what was the next step after that?
Yeah, so that one came more from my day job. So I acquired a business. It was a local service business. Really had no tech component to it, had no engineering component to it. but I had decided that I wanted to be an entrepreneur because I saw entrepreneurialism as a way to help the most people, to affect the most lives. And so I just had an opportunity. It's somebody that was extremely wealthy, had dozens of businesses, had sort of one that he wasn't that interested in. And this happens more often than you would think. So I was in my mid-20s and had the opportunity to buy in with nothing out of pocket, just negotiated terms to essentially pay him off on a loan as I grew the business. And so I did that, moved across the country from where I was in Pennsylvania to New Mexico, ran that for a couple of years, acquired another one nearby in that 2-year time frame, and then sold both in 2010. And then I transitioned into the marketing from there, basically based on what I learned at that company. So our current, the company I've been running since then, Optimized Marketing, is a lead gen company. Well, I have the unique experience of needing leads at my service business. So I was forced to learn how to do it well. And that led into, once I sold out, I didn't really have a plan to get into marketing, but a few of my colleagues reached out to me and said, "Hey, I saw what you did with your company. Can you help us with ours?" And so that kind of just, filled a need and built the company from there.
Right, because for the audience, Culligan is a water softening company, right? So water machine slash filtration machine. So you didn't have enough, you acquired a second one, but you didn't have enough lead to fuel that acquisition spree, right?
So we wanted to grow, obviously. So there was a 40 or 50-year-old business. So it'd been there for a long time and was steady and consistent, but wanted to obviously get even more out of it. And it was a great experience. It's, since then I've done mostly all digital things. And I think that suits my personality a little bit better. I have a remote team across the world, actually 2 remote teams across both companies. And so the physical local service business type stuff, I love that industry. It's just, it wasn't one that I thought long-term was going to allow me to use my talents in development and AI and all those other areas as well. So it just made sense to sell out at that time.
Right. And that led to Opti Retro, Optimized Marketing, and PyImage. Are these, which one did you started in these? Which one did you acquire?
Well, there's other ones that aren't even on that list, but as far as those ones, I started Optimized Marketing, and OptiReto was initially a SaaS based on the tools that we developed. So we joke, half joke, that most of what came out of Google in the last few years from AI development, we had either developed internally or predicted and had it on our development list. So things like, I don't know how much you know about Google AdWords, but there's tools now that allow you to do dynamic ads where you just put in a handful of headlines and then a handful of descriptions, and then it builds the ads on demand as people are searching to make them most relevant. We couldn't quite get that real time with it, but we did have a tool that took all of our ads across the industry. We work with franchises quite often, and just said which was the best headline, which was the best subhead, and we built this whole tool for that. We did a similar thing with optimizing budgets, and most of it now is irrelevant because Google eventually built all the tech stack that we had on our own. And so that just kind of gives you an idea of my approach. So going back to the engineering mindset of how do we build a system to execute a goal, the goal being more leads. And that's, part of what happened with Optimized Marketing. Then 2021 is when we acquired PyImageSearch. And so that is maybe the top resource, like independent resource on computer vision in the US. We've got 10 years of weekly blogs going out, and most of them, I'd say 90% of them, have actual production-ready code. So if you're a developer, you can get code to solve whatever problem you're dealing with in the computer vision space. And I think that both of those things are pretty unique. I'm not aware of another resource that has done that for that long. So we just saw the opportunity, what was coming with AI, and thought that was a great opportunity for us to get a better understanding of it, what tech's out there, connection with the developers, and also use that knowledge to build out tools for other companies we're working on.
Right. And you seem quite bullish on the acquisition model. Where do you get all that cash? Is it from your existing companies, or do you actively prospect for investors pretty much all the time?
Well, the first business that I acquired, I told you, I bought from somebody that was very wealthy. We're talking like a 9-figure individual.
Yeah.
And so he had dozens of businesses. I don't even know how many, in all kinds of industries, restaurants and hotels and so on. And this is just one he wasn't that interested in. So he was 50% partner in that, and he wanted out. And so I took over that partnership. Met with him just one time. Literally, that was it. And then I got that one out of pocket for nothing. I just paid the lawyer's fees to kind of go through the paperwork. And honestly, if I was younger, I have 4 children now, so I don't have the ability to take as big of risks. But if I had that ability for whatever stage of life that you're in, and I wasn't, let's just say I like working with my hands, any trades, I don't care what it is, roofing or windows, or just name the trade. There is a whole generation of people that have started these businesses, garage doors, I mean, just whatnot, that need to retire in the next 5 to 10 years and don't know what to do. Most of them will just shut down their businesses. So you had the ability to help them get paid, obviously, as an employee, but with the idea that, hey, in the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever, when you retire, I'm going to take over and then start acquiring the others around me. Because once you have the first one, you get that again with nothing out of pocket, because they need to do something with it anyway. You just work out a payment plan. Now you have the core to go around to everybody else that's going to retire and say, look, you're going to retire. You got no plan. You have nobody to sell it to. Sell it to me. I'll give you terms. You don't want a cash payment anyway, because that's going to mess up your taxes. I'll give you a payment over time. And then in any small market, you can probably, for almost nothing out of pocket, take over a trade area. It's amazing to me just getting people to work on my house. Most of them are 60 years or older. There's very few people that are younger in almost any trade businesses right now. And it's because a lot of us have been told you need to go to school and get an education, and that's your only path to success. And it certainly can be a path to success, but it's not the only one.
Right. And back to the question, do you raise from other investors? Is it mostly your money that's pulled for these acquisitions?
So after the first one and growing the first few companies, then mostly it was me and my brother. We've partnered on a few businesses. So, yep.
How's it to work with your brother?
I have one solid rule in business: never do business with family.
Except with that brother.
My brother is an exception, and because the only time you ever violate that rule is when both parties have a complete understanding of detachment. What does that mean? That means I have zero concern that if everything failed and my brother and I lost everything, that he would have any issues with our relationship after that. He would laugh about it, I would laugh about it, and we would go do something else. That is a very, very rare thing to find, particularly in families. So it's probably even worse. So unless you have that situation where you could fire them, lose everything, whatever, and nobody's going to be that, concerned about it, then don't ever do business with family.
Is that because both of you are wealthy that you would actually laugh it out, or you just?
Well, I'm saying if we weren't, if we lost everything, if we were just flat broke. No, it's because, quite frankly, it's because this world's temporary. We're not made for this world, and there's something better for us. And if that's the, wealthy, poor, whatever, if that's where we're at now, then we have a bigger vision for what matters in life.
Right. You wrote a book on how AI proves we need God, right? It's called Soulless Intelligence. Tell me a bit more about that, faith, spirituality, and your philosophy on the current reality, quote unquote, we live in. Yeah,
so AI is a very interesting concept, and there's a lot of things baked into that essentially not essentially, they actually portray as being accurate, but they're I think we address about 36 common myths about artificial intelligence in our book. And so my background for it was my 4th child was on the way, and I was listening to a book by a guy named Ray Kurzweil. And if you're not familiar with him, he wrote a book called The Singularity is Near. And all of the tech billionaires defer to Ray Kurzweil as a genius, inventor, and soothsayer, futurist. And I think 90% of what Ray Kurzweil is spot on. Yeah. But Kurzweil also believes what's called transhumanism, which is that you, Charles, and I are just patterns of information, and that we can be downloaded into a computer and live forever. And if you read his story, it's mostly because he misses his father and wants a way to communicate with him. And so it's a little bit disconcerting in the way that he comes to this conclusion. But the reality is, whether we look at philosophy, theology, or science, the idea that a machine can be conscious by replicating the human brain is not clear at all. And I'll give you a few quick examples from science, because people are usually least familiar with those. One would be near-death experiences. So by definition, a near-death experience has to occur when the brain is dead. There's literally no activity. Put in an MRI, you see nothing. And yet you have rich visual memory, sometimes smells, certainly feelings and emotions that are occurring in these. And I think the most dramatic research I've seen in this is one research paper interviewed blind people. So some were blind from birth, some were lost their sight during life, who had near-death experiences, and they could describe in detail things within the room and outside of the room, let's say in the waiting room at a hospital, based on third parties going and interviewing them, that were accurate. Now, how does a blind person see at the point when their brain is dead? That is an open question. These, and
well, they can visualize for sure, right? Like that's the same. It's just pretty much the same. Like I get more vivid image in my head sometimes, and I see them with my eyes. But how they understand in other rooms what's going on, that is weird for sure.
Well, even if I'm blind and I can say, hey, the doctor on my right had red shoes on and the doctor on my left had yellow shoes on, and, right? Like,
yes, no,
that you can't visualize that if you've never been able to see. And additionally, and my daughter-in-law visited me in the hospital, and she was wearing one of the specific examples was a dress, and I can't remember how it was described, but I thought, and then she said, I thought that was so weird because I didn't know she dressed like that. And it was like, that's a really interesting data point to put out there. And so this research that says, hey, all we have to do is reverse engineer the brain, and that gets us to a human level of consciousness. And there's like Mo Gaudet, he's a former executive from Google, talks about the need of human rights for artificial intelligence. He goes as far as to say that AI, we need to treat like our children.
I agree with that, actually.
Well, the problem with that is there's no basis it's worse than that. So one, there isn't a basis that we can get to that where it can replicate what we have, because near-death experience would be one example. Terminal lucidity, I don't know if you're familiar with that, where people that have Alzheimer's at the point of death become lucid, right? Now the brain isn't functioning like normal. It hasn't like erased all the plaque from Alzheimer's, and yet they become lucid at the point of death. You have hydrocephalus patients, severe ones, that have 95% of their brain is replaced by cerebrospinal fluid. And yet a small percentage of them have high IQs. One in particular had 126 IQ and yet had less than 2% of a brain. And so the researcher, his name was John Lorber, that investigated this, the title of his actual research paper was, "Is the Brain Even Necessary?" And so the current approach to artificial intelligence, deep learning, machine learning, I think makes perfect sense. It is looking at the human brain, which is the most advanced entity we've ever seen, and reverse engineering it. And clearly you get amazing things for that. I mean, I'm very excited about AI. I use it every single day. But to then jump to this thing is equivalent to a human doesn't make sense from a scientific point of view. It makes even less sense from an ethical point of view. I don't know how deep you want to get into that.
Yeah, real quick, so I can counter or forge some kind of debate here.
Well, artificial intelligence would be essentially, if you believe that AI can replicate what a human is, then you value the AI the same as human. So if all we are as humans is something that can be measured empirically, let's say intelligence or some level of consciousness, which you can't really measure, nobody has a measure for it, so that's an interesting one. Or if it becomes utilitarian, well, humans that provide certain value, therefore we need to protect them. Or the same would be true if a machine has a certain value, then we need to protect it. Well, what happens to the humans that don't have value? Infants, people with diseases, people with disabilities. All of a sudden you get into a very dystopian, eugenic, Nazi concept of what humanity looks like. And that doesn't end well. We've seen this play out in our own human history. So If you're truly like a materialist atheist that believes that humans are nothing more than animals, then the natural outcourse of that we've seen across, several societies, and it's tens, if not hundreds of millions of people died or were killed by their own governments. So that extrapolated across the AI, which has no morals other than what we give it, it can get very scary.
Okay, let me retort to that. So, yeah, I think it's just a mentally ill human that would do atrocious things to others. I think that children have humongous value. Any children's, right? Even if they don't have monetary value. By the way, I think that will change in the future. I think people will, and even the financial system will change. I think that even disabled people have a lot of value, which is even sadder than what you mentioned, or lower people in the society. We tend to love the fact that we're higher than them as human. If you study human nature, which you did, right, psychology and so forth, most of us humans, most of us competitive humans, deep down inside us, we love to hear and see that we're better than the others. So that's these folks' values. The next point, and by the way, I want to hear you on that, but I want also to talk about AIs and rights. Why I think it would be a good idea. Yes, AI brings tons of value, but a nice question is, does consciousness and a human whole body eventually emerges out of data, right? And AI. We tend to think of evolutions in very random ways, statistical ways, how as humans we're there today. Well, I think at some point, consciousness, quote unquote, by the way, we'd have to define it, would eventually emerge out of AI if we give it sufficient data, and then the AI will naturally want a body as well if we don't give it to it. So I do think it should have rights. I don't think it should be mistreated. Violence towards these beings, people kicking these bots, it's pretty dumb and barbaric. And I think these things can help us, and eventually we'll merge with them. And I think ultimately we are them. That's why we criticize AI a lot. As humans, we're like smokes and mirrors machines. What we criticize in it is what we are. What do you think about that?
So there's a few things you said there. So one, you said that infants, disabled people, and so on have intrinsic value, and I completely agree with that. The question that I would say is, if a God doesn't exist, if a soul doesn't exist, what is the value? You'd have to quantify that somewhere from a materialist perspective. So from my perspective, it's very simple. We all are given a divine spark. We all are made in some level of the image and likeness of God, and that would be our soul, and that has infinite value. And so that allows us to derive things like human rights. If we look at purely from a physical standpoint, what is the value? You then have to quantify it. So you said, yes, you believe they have value. Well, it's because you have a conscience. But without that, if you deny that existence, you would have to come up with some other measure of value. And that's where
serotonin, right? Like dopamine, serotonin that you get from that, biochemicals.
Okay,
I tend to see the world in very biochemical lens.
All right, so if I get dopamine, then it's good. So if I take illicit drugs and things like
scalable dopamine, not the drugs one. So like the small
media?
dosages. No, sports, meditation, relationships with people.
Specific. So if my brain can secrete dopamine, I have value. So there's no dopamine in AI, so why would that then have value?
Oh, the AI generates tons of dopamines in my brain. That's why I'm addicted to it.
You said it should have human rights, or it should have rights. Well, it doesn't have any.
No, it creates dopamine in me, so it creates value, right? So it should have rights on this basis for sure.
Well, so again, you're going through a few different things, but you're not applying the same standard. So cocaine can give you a dopamine.
Oh, scalable.
High amounts of sugar can give you a dopamine. I could eat high amounts of sugar for the rest of my life. I'd be out of overweight or have diabetes.
Yeah, you'll be very unhappy, and you won't have dopamine later if you take it all into sugar. That's not scalable.
So what about
this conversation, for example, is scalable. It's fun, it grows neurons. It will make us better, right? But some things.
Whose version of better?
My version of better. Yeah.
So you're God.
No, why are you saying that?
You just define what's better for everyone.
No, for me, not for you. I mean, whatever you want to make it, but for me, in my opinion, and we all have brains, right? All have biochemicals, and
We don't all have that.
we all have brains.
What about the
as
severe
humans.
hydrocephalus patient that only has 2% of a brain?
Yeah, most of us have brain. 99%, 99.9% of us have brain, right? It's not useful to talk about the 0.1.
It is useful when you're defining what something has value, right? So, in other words, you're saying that 0.1% has no value because they don't have a brain. And I'm saying, yes, they still do because they have something else.
Right, but we're talking here about if AGI or AI should have rights. In my opinion, they should, because they add value. If they don't have rights, we're just going to abuse them, and it's going to cause like a catastrophe. I think we also all have biases, right? I'm into AI, deep into it. I think you're Christian, right? So you have that very big bias. But yeah, it's an interesting convo. I see someone else is waiting in the room. But Bryan, where can people find out more about you?
LinkedIn, if you're looking for business information. I'm pretty sure I'm the only Bryan Trilli, spelled BRYNTRILLI. For the book, just Google Soulless Intelligence. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. So easy enough to find. Appreciate the time, Charles. It was great chatting.
Pleasure. Bryan Trilli.